All right, so today we're diving into something I think a lot of people have probably thought about. Um, Disney princesses. These characters, they're iconic, right? They've been with us for generations. This time, our source material is a podcast called Disney Princesses Role Models or Not. And it really got me thinking, are they a force for good? Or is there some baggage that comes with them? I mean,
Well,
I'm sure like a lot of our listeners probably grew up with them. And yeah, it just got me thinking.
well, what's so interesting to me is how they've become more than just characters on screen,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
I mean, they're cultural icons. I mean, we're still talking about them. They spark all these conversations about women and societal expectations
Yeah.
and even how we think about happily ever after.
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating. They really do have the staying power. I think part of it is they tap into something we all kind of connect with. The podcast host mentioned this. Princesses are often seen as embodying hope, kindness, and bravery, and those are all things we admire, right? But the question is, do they go beyond just representing those things? Do they actually inspire people? No.
That's the core of the debate.
Right.
The podcast actually makes a really good case for them as positive role models. And they highlight a bunch of examples, like Ariel in The Little Mermaid. I mean, she's totally going after her dreams, even when it means going against her dad and going into this whole unknown world. And then there's Mulan. So much bravery and loyalty there, disguising herself as a man to take her father's place in the army. And we can't forget about the more modern princesses either, Moana and Tiana, both of them just bursting with resilience and determination when they're facing these seemingly impossible obstacles.
Those are such good examples, and I think it shows how these characters can inspire people, especially young viewers. I mean, seeing someone like Moana literally sail across uncharted waters to save her people. I mean, she's not waiting around for some prince to come save her. She's taking charge, you
Right.
know? And that's a powerful message about agency and self-reliance.
Exactly. And that's key with the newer princesses like Moana and Elsa. There's this shift from needing external validation, like finding a prince, to finding internal validation, achieving their own goals, self-discovery. They're not just reacting to things that are happening to them, they're shaping them.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's not just the qualities themselves, but how they embody them through what they do. But the podcast also talks about the criticisms, right? There's this whole conversation about how some princesses might reinforce those outdated gender roles. So it's like, are they setting up these unrealistic expectations? Especially for young girls.
Absolutely. I mean, think about Cinderella or Snow White. Their stories, they're charming, but they're mainly about finding happiness through romantic relationships. I mean, sure, romance can be part of a fulfilling life, but the concern is it might overshadow other aspirations for young viewers.
It's that classic damsel in distress trope, waiting for the prince to come solve all their problems. It's like sending this subtle message that a woman's happiness depends on finding a partner.
Yeah, and it can accidentally lead to this belief that women can't solve their own problems or, find fulfillment on their own. It's that dependence on a male character for happiness that makes Moana's journey so different. It's breaking away from that older narrative.
Right, and then there's that whole manic pixie dream girl thing that's often associated with some of the earlier princesses. They're quirky and charming, but it's like their main purpose is to help the guy find himself. Like they don't have their own depth and agency.
Totally. And that's where the evolution of Disney princesses gets interesting. Things have definitely changed. It reflects how society's norms and values have changed, too.
Yeah, you can really see the contrast when you compare the classic princesses with the modern ones, like Moana and Elsa. They're all about self-discovery and independence. Elsa learns to embrace her powers, even though they make her different and people don't understand her. And Moana, she sets sail not to find romance, but to save her people and fulfill her own destiny.
They're shaping their own destinies. They're resourceful, brave, and capable of leading. It feels like a conscious decision by Disney to portray women who aren't just waiting to be rescued, they're taking charge.
That's a big shift. But what's interesting is even with this evolution, people interpret these characters in different ways. The podcast shared some listener stories, and it really showed this. Some people found the princesses empowering, while others had totally valid criticisms. It shows there's no one right way to see them.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway. These characters, even though we love them, they can be interpreted in many different ways. The podcast hosts really emphasize that there's no single right answer when it comes to their impact. They can be empowering and problematic, and how we see them is often shaped by our own experiences and what we value. And that's where parents and teachers come in. It's not about keeping kids away from these stories. It's about giving them the tools to think critically about them.
So it's not just taking in the princess narrative passively, but like actively engaging with it, questioning it, challenging it, even reimagining it.
Right. The podcast had a child development expert talk about this.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting what they said. They were saying that Disney princesses can be a starting point for important conversations.
Hmm.
Like instead of just accepting everything you see, parents can use these stories to encourage kids to think critically.
I'm curious what kind of advice they had. How do we actually have these conversations with kids about such complicated things?
Well, one thing is asking the right questions. So like instead of just watching Cinderella and that's it, you could pause it and ask your kid, do you think finding a romantic partner is the only way to be happy? Or what are some other ways Cinderella could have achieved her dreams?
That's a good way to get them thinking beyond the surface. What about movies like Mulan? There's a lot to talk about there in terms of challenging traditional gender roles.
Absolutely.
Mm.
You could talk about how Mulan's bravery and her willingness to go against expectations. It challenges what it means to be a woman or a hero. You could ask your kid, what do you think about Mulan pretending to be a man? Was it the right thing to do? What other options did she have?
It's about giving kids the power to form their own opinions, not just accepting everything they see on screen.
Exactly. And by having these conversations, you're not just talking about Disney princesses. You're helping kids develop critical thinking skills that they can use in all parts of their lives. You're teaching them to question what they see in the media and advertising, even in their everyday interactions.
So we've talked about how princesses have changed over time, the good and bad messages they might have, and the importance of critical thinking. But where do we end up on this whole role models or not question?
Well, the podcast doesn't really give a clear answer. And I think that's on purpose. It shows how complex the issue is. These characters can be captivating and inspiring, but they can also reinforce some ideas that might not fit with today's values.
So it's kind of a mixed bag.
In a way, yeah. But that ambiguity isn't necessarily a bad thing. It encourages us to think critically about what we watch and read, and what messages it sends, especially to younger people. It reminds us that even stories we love can have a darker side.
That's a really important point. I think we often get caught up in the nostalgia and the magic of these movies, and it's easy to miss those subtle messages they might be sending.
Exactly, and that's why these conversations are so important. It's not about banning Disney princesses or saying they're all good or all bad. It's about engaging with these stories thoughtfully and using them as opportunities to talk and learn. It's about recognizing that even fairy tales can teach us about the world, both the good and the bad.
It feels like we've gone beyond just, are they good role models or not? This is about media literacy, right? Teaching kids and ourselves to think for ourselves
Well,
about what we're watching and reading.
you got it. It's about giving young viewers the tools to analyze these stories, to see both the good and the bad, to ask,
Yeah.
why is this character acting this way? What are their motivations? What are the messages here?
And ultimately, do I agree with these messages?
Right. It's about encouraging them to form their own opinions, to challenge the stories they're given, and even to reimagine these stories in ways that fit with their own values.
Yeah.
Think about it, they can take the parts they admire, the courage, the kindness, the determination, and create their own heroes and heroines who reflect the world they want to see.
That's pretty powerful when you think about it. It's not about Disney telling us what a princess or a hero should be. It's about recognizing the power of storytelling and then using that power to encourage critical thinking, spark conversations, and ultimately empower young people to create their own stories.
That's a beautiful way to put it. We can enjoy the magic and entertainment of these movies, while also recognizing their limitations. We can use them to talk about important issues, like gender roles, societal expectations, and finding happiness.
I think we've done some serious deep diving ourselves today. We've explored why Disney princesses are so popular, the arguments for and against them as role models, how they've changed over time, and how important it is to engage with these stories thoughtfully and critically.
And I hope our listeners will keep talking about this too. It's a topic that's worth thinking about and discussing.
Definitely. So listeners, here's something to think about. How can you use the stories of Disney princesses, the good, the bad, and everything in between, to have meaningful conversations and encourage critical thinking? With your kids, your friends, or even just yourself, it's a question worth exploring. Until next time, keep on diving. It's like we're taking these old fairy tales and giving them a 21st century makeover, not just accepting them, but really looking at what they're saying about the world and about us.
That's what's so cool about these stories. They're like a mirror, showing us our own values and beliefs. And as we learn more about the world, our view of these stories can change too. We can reimagine them, rewrite them, even reclaim them to fit with a better, more equal world.
And that's where the real power is. We're not stuck with just one story. We can challenge those old tropes, celebrate the good stuff, and use these stories to get people talking, to think critically, and to empower ourselves and future generations.
That's a great point. Like, instead of just focusing on a princess's beauty or wanting a prince, we can look at her intelligence, her courage, her resilience. We can change the story to be about her inner strength and how she overcomes challenges, whether she has a romantic partner or not.
Totally. Like Belle in Beauty and the Beast, people always talk about how she loves to read and she's independent, but we
Mhm.
can go even further. We can look at her relationship with the Beast and think about consent, healthy boundaries, and what love really means when there's this power imbalance.
That's a perfect example.
Mm,
It shows how these fairy tales that seem so simple can actually bring up really complicated and important topics. We can use them to teach kids and remind ourselves that real love isn't about sacrificing your own needs or putting up with bad treatment. It's about respect, understanding, and growing together.
I think it's important to remember, too, that Disney princesses are just one part of all the media that influences us. We need to be having these critical conversations about all kinds of media, movies, TV shows, books, video games, and how they all shape what we think about gender roles and what society expects of us.
Absolutely. Media literacy is so important these days. We're constantly getting messages thrown at us. We need to learn and teach our kids how to analyze those messages, to spot biases, to challenge stereotypes, and to make smart choices about what we watch and read and what values we believe in.
It's not about censoring or avoiding things, it's about engaging with them. It's about understanding how powerful stories are in shaping our view of the world, and then using that power to make things better.
Exactly. We can take back the stories, rewrite the scripts, and become the authors of our own lives. And who knows, maybe we can inspire a whole new generation of princesses and princes and everyone in between who are brave, kind, caring, and determined to make a world that's truly fair for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. We've come to the end of our deep dive, and it's been quite a journey. We've explored the amazing world of Disney princesses, talked about the good and bad of them as role models, and really focused on the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and the power of stories.
It's been great exploring this with you.
Yeah.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us.
Remember, the conversation doesn't stop here. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep rewriting the stories to create a world that reflects what you believe in. Until next time, keep on diving.